Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Mancuso, and this is our second ecology video. So before I got started on this one, I just really liked this picture. So it goes all the way, starting with an atom, building up to molecules or compounds, and then cell organelles, and then a cell. So these are each of the levels, going from the very minimal, smallest thing to the greatest level of organization. And then cells organize themselves into tissues, and tissues into organs, and organs into organ systems, which make up an organism. And then population is all the members of the same species. And then the next one, they left this one out. This one would be community. So community are all the living organisms in an area. And then ecosystem, you have both the biotic, the living things, and the abiotic, the physical environment that makes up your ecosystem. And then a biome is a region where the climate is very typical for that area, and they have like the same flora and fauna, so like the same plant life and animal life in that area. And then biosphere refers to all of the areas on Earth where organisms can be. All right, so those levels I think just help you understand. All right, so energy flow, that's what this 8.2 is all about. And a lot of this is going to seem like things that you have learned maybe even from elementary school on. So hopefully this is like quite a refresher for you, and not too much will be super new to you. So properties of an ecosystem. So first of all, this is the one that I just referred to. It's all those organisms that are in the community, as well as the physical parts of the environment, like the amount of sunlight and the amount of rain and the temperature and things like that. And it could be an ecosystem could be something small that you're looking at, like an aquarium, or something huge, like an entire forest could be your ecosystem. And then there's two things about an ecosystem that you have to make sure you're always thinking about: the energy and the actual chemicals. So like the carbon, the oxygen, the nitrogen, those are constantly cycled, but energy is constantly flowing through from the sun and then being used by organisms. And so energy enters as solar radiation, so sun, used in photosynthesis, used to build carbohydrates in a plant. And then eventually, as organisms eat plants and organisms go through their normal metabolism, they lose energy and they lose it as heat. But mass is conserved. So everything gets cycled, or you can think of it as everything gets recycled. So the cycling of actual mass, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, always happens in an ecosystem. All right, trophic levels. So this is where you're going to be like, oh, Merm, we know this stuff. So like an autotroph, that's something that makes their own food. So they build sugars using carbon dioxide and water. Or chemosynthesis, these are organisms like bacteria that are able to use like nitrogen or sulfur, and they are actually able to build organic molecules as well, but they don't use the sun. They use chemicals that are literally in the soil or in the air. All right, heterotrophs. So heterotrophs are anything that has to eat. All right, so they rely on other organisms to make food and then they eat them. And then things go from primary producers, so your autotrophs, to your primary consumers, those are the herbivores, to secondary consumers, those are the carnivores, to tertiary consumers, so carnivores that eat off of other animals. All right, detrivores are a new word for decomposers. So those are just the organisms that are recycling dead material. Fungus, bacteria, those are the things that are usually our detrivores. And then decomposition is so important because it does the chemical recycling, so it really connects all the trophic levels. So I thought I would just draw one with you. So I actually went to grab this and it just didn't have the words connected to it, so I figured that might be helpful. So first down here, our little key. The blue is representing all of the chemical cycling, and the red is the energy flow. So we start off with the sun here. So the sun's energy is used by our primary producers. So those are all of our plants. Those are all of our, even algae, all of our things that are doing photosynthesis or chemosynthesis and converting the sun's energy and converting small inorganic molecules like water and carbon dioxide into sugar. And then they are eaten by primary consumers, which are eaten by secondary consumers, which are eaten by tertiary consumers. And the arrows always go in the direction of energy flow and chemical flow. So you'll see the energy goes from the sun to the producers and from the producers to the consumers. You'll see everything gets cycled back. So this is all of our dead material. We call this detritus. And these are all of our decomposers. All right, so everything is being cycled here. Energy is cycled, materials are cycled. Some energy is lost as heat. So like these ones over here, this can be heat being lost from organisms. All right, moving on, primary production. So primary production is talking about how much photosynthesis is going on in an area, all right? And the extent of it really tells you how much an ecosystem has. So like the more photosynthesis an ecosystem can do, the more organisms it's going to be able to handle. But something I put in here is just to realize that the amount of sunlight used is very limited. So think about the sun for a minute. It's a great sunny day. So first of all, there's not all sunny days. So that's one limitation. But picture it's a really sunny day. So it's a sunny day. Is all of that sunlight being used by plants to do photosynthesis? Goodness gracious, no. Some of it is landing on you. Some of it is landing on the sidewalk. Some of it's landing on a road or a building. Very little, like literally less than 1% of sun's energy ever even goes to a plant. So hard to imagine such a small number, but it is really, really small. So the production that an ecosystem can do, so like how much photosynthesis can it do total, that's called its GPP. It's gross primary production. Basically, how much sugar can you make? How much photosynthesis can you do? That's your GPP. We used to do calculations on this, and AP has taken it out. So we're actually not doing calculations on this, but we used to relate it right back to oxygen production. So based on the amount of oxygen that was produced, it would tell us how much photosynthesis was going on. So that was our GPP, but then we know that oxygen is also used in respiration. So you never really have your full gross. Instead, you have your net primary production. So think of it like a company. If you had your own company, you could be like, oh my gosh, I sold $50 today. And it was like, wait, but how much did you put into that? So you needed 30 of the dollars to actually make, let's say you're making t-shirts or something. $30 went into it. So you actually only profited $20. So NPP is like your profit. So if you take the total amount of photosynthesis you can do, take out the energy that you use for respiration, and that's your overall production. That's your net primary productivity. All right, secondary production is how much of the nutrients can get passed on to the next organism. So like from one trophic level to the next, how much can get passed. So we call it trophic efficiency. We basically go with this 10% rule. So I know that bugs, like some organisms, can pass on actually way more than 10% of their energy to the next generation, but then other organisms pass on very little. Like I think like not anything really eats us, but we only have like 5% energy that could get passed on from us. So as you go through a food chain, as you go up, it's really less and less efficient. So by the time something reaches a tertiary consumer, so if we said we had 100% of it in our producers, then only 10% gets passed on to the primary, and then just 1% onto the secondary, and then 0.1 passed on to the tertiary. So that's where that number is coming from. And we call this our energy pyramid. So here's our pyramid of energy. And so you can think of it as like, oh, let's say, I'm just going to make up a number here. And let's say this is 10,000, well, for energy joules. All right. Then what can get passed on to this one is only 1,000 joules of energy. And then what can get passed on to the next level is only 100 joules of energy and only 10 joules of energy to this one. So each one, only 10% of that energy actually gets passed on. That's why the numbers work out. So like if you did a pyramid of numbers or a pyramid of biomass, you're always going to have so many more producers in an area by mass versus tertiary consumers. You just can't have that many tertiary consumers because you don't have the energy to support it. All right, endo versus ectotherm. So this might be something where you really need to learn something new. This might be the newer part of it. So most animals are maintaining a constant body temperature. And if you are an endotherm, then you use your heat to maintain your body temperature. So it stays pretty constant, like your body temperature stays 98.6. But an organism that's an ectotherm relies on the environment. So they are the organisms like a snake. So it doesn't maintain a constant body temperature. Instead, it modifies its behavior and it goes out into the sun to actually warm up. So organisms do exchange heat with their environment. So radiation is like soaking in the heat, taking in the heat, but also you can also lose heat. Evaporation and convection help heat go out of your body. Endotherms have much higher metabolic rates. So your metabolic rate is basically the sum of all the chemical reactions that are going on in your body. It's not just like how fast you digest food, but it's like, it obviously is your respiration rate, but it's really all your chemical reactions. And if you are an endotherm, you have much higher metabolic rates than ectotherms do. And that's because they're burning large amounts of food. And so they're using that to keep their body at that consistent internal body temperature. And then our last slide for this video is, again, just comparing metabolism. So metabolism, not super efficient. Like we said before, all the chemical reactions that you do tend to lose heat. So when heat is released, your body is going to lose that heat. And endotherms use that heat to keep their body temperature, but ectotherms don't. And your metabolic rate, so your basal metabolic rate is the term for organisms like us. So endotherms, we have a BMR. And if you're an ectotherm, you have an SMR, so a standard metabolic rate. And among endotherms, if you are small, you tend to have much higher metabolic rates than if you're large. And it has to do with, it actually has to do with a lot of things. It is not a very simple area. It has to do with surface area. It has to do with your individual cells. It has to do with how much energy is available when you eat. It has to do with even latitude. Like there's so many factors that have been studied looking at this, but the basic rule is that smaller animals have higher metabolic rates than larger animals. And I just put an example here because I thought this one was pretty awesome. So it's showing this kind of field mouse and an elephant, and it shows their grams. And then I just have to make this a little larger. So 35 grams for the mouse and 4,500,000 grams for the elephant. And then if you look at their overall metabolic rate, 890 cubic millimeters of oxygen. So they measure it by oxygen again, because they're using oxygen. So metabolic rate, how much oxygen are they using per gram? So per gram of body tissue, they use 890 per hour for a mouse, but only 75 per gram per hour for an elephant. So I just thought that was a great example to end on. All right, have a great day, everybody.